Hey everybody out there, my name is Tommy and this is my channel, Counting on the Big Sleep, and we are at Forest Preserves here. We come here every day, Sunday after church. Even though I was in farther away, I still wanted to come to the same church that I started with. I like that one. I might change, I'm not sure. It was a nice service. They talked about Timothy 1 and Paul's letter and stuff, But it was a big Christmas theme. They had Christmas trees and stuff like that up, you know. But yeah, it was a nice service. It was a good service, you know. It was a good day to be out there. And I figured I'd come out to the woods here for a while and chill and take a look at nature. Let me turn around. There, yes, that's me. So yeah, it was a good service. It was a good service, I did I think I did. I tell you, I did get a job. Yeah, about 3 days ago. The very first place I quit called me. The one that in earlier videos where I said it was an hour away, but since now I was out in Manteno. For some strange reason, he called me and asked me if I want to come back to work. And this has been in like almost a year. I was like, yeah, I'll come back right then. I'll come back tonight. So now, at least I'm working, trying to find a place, maybe, apartment out there, closer to the job and stuff, But yeah, it was just kind of big weird, because it was one big circle. It was the job that I was talking about that was an hour away, and I didn't want to drive there because my car broke down. It cost me $1,400 to do it, and I just figured it was too far, and I just looked for something else, But if I had done that in the first place, just gone out there and stayed with my cousin, which I'm doing now, I would have just kept that same job. And, I wouldn't have put myself through all this stress and stuff and this depression the whole year, It's just so weird. It was just like one giant circle. The job that I prayed for and wanted, I got. But like I said, it was an hour away, and then my car broke down. And even after that, the guy wasn't going to fire me at all. He wasn't going to fire me, he was upset that I left. But I did stay in contact with him a couple times, and I did apologize to him. First time I called, I apologized, for quitting like that. He didn't call me back, and then I waited a couple weeks. And I called him again. This was earlier in the year. And he finally responded. He said, yeah, shit happens, Because I didn't want to be enemies with this guy. He was really nice, So, for some strange reason, then he called, asked me if I wanted a job. And I said, yeah. I said, I'm right out here. I'm like 20 minutes away. He's like, all right, we'll use all your old credentials and stuff. And, so far, I don't know if I have to fill anything else new out, new tax papers. They have it all. I did it once. They should still have it in their file, So, but yeah, it was just weird that it all went like in this giant circle. If I would have just done what I was supposed to do in the first place, keep the job and just go out there and stay at my cousin's, I could have made enough money and still rented out the apartment to come over on weekends when I was off and staying at his house for free, really, basically. They've been really nice. I just throw in money for some food and that's about it, But yeah, there's a load of them there. I forgot to say, my sister lives there. Her son is my nephew, his wife, and we have my niece's daughter, she lives there too. And they got like 4 dogs, 3 Rottweilers, and, one pit bull. And I've been having the hardest time I can trying to sleep during the day. Because I start at 9 at night, and I get off at 5:30. So, and I try and stay awake until at least 9 o'clock. That's when I try and start to go to bed. I say a lot, I'm sorry. But, I try to go to bed around 9 in the morning. But them dogs will keep on waking me up throughout the day. It gets aggravating a little. Even though I put in earplugs, it doesn't, the earplugs don't, take away the whole sound. So I've been looking for a place. Hopefully I can find a place. It's pretty well cheap. 800 would be nice. If I found something for 800, whether a 1 bedroom, or a 2 bedroom. I know it's just dreaming, but that's the price I really would like to pay. And they pay the water bill, please. I don't want to pay the water bill. Even though I'm using the water bill, that should be on taxes and stuff, or just include it in the rent. Charge me $8.50 for water. As long as they take care of the water. But it's been one of them days, But yeah, it's been a good day actually. Went to church, came here, talked to some friends, which was nice. Got some coffee from Dunkin' Donuts, But my friend said maybe God was testing me. I don't know. Maybe see how fucking strong and how much I could take. But I know at the end of, my lease, in the last video I was talking about, I felt like fighting for things. I did, and I still do. I'm going to try my best to keep this job. Even though there's paperwork that has to go with it, and I'm really terrible at paperwork, but I'm going to try. I'm going to try, definitely. And I know it's not going to be easy, because in the back of my head, I say it's going to be difficult, but, it's going to get better eventually. But it might get difficult. It's going to get difficult. Especially in the winter, and I'm out in the country-ish. Driving them roads sometimes, you can't, there's no street lights. I'm like, what the heck, man? No street lights. And then you got these open fields and just snow just blowing on you. So, but the good thing is I start at 9 at night, so there's no traffic, and I'm going down these county roads to get to the place. So there's no traffic really, but with and it gets foggy out there in the morning, especially in the morning. In the morning, especially when it's like heavy snow, it gets like foggy where you can't see, even though it's not snowing anymore. But the whole thing is like fog. So you got to use your brights. But 5:30 in the morning, me and maybe a couple other people may be going down the same road. So, that's a good thing. That's a blessing. Definitely. Even though it's scary at times, doing 30 miles an hour. But what can you do? Because you could easily slide off on these county roads right into a ditch. And I've seen people do it too already. Just slide into a ditch. So, I don't want to be one of those people. But, yeah, the church was good. The big message, that I was getting out of it all was, what I've always said, 2 main things. Love your God and love your neighbor. And even you can throw in there, love your enemy. That's the things that Jesus was saying. Open your heart, feed the people who are hungry, clothe the ones that have no clothes, someone's thirsty, give them the drink. I mean, that's the kind of message I got from it. Open your heart, not just, to Jesus, but, to God and to other ones, everyone around you. Try to be a better human being, a nicer human being. And maybe it will happen someday. Who knows? Nobody knows. I mean, for me to understand what's inside, the head of God is almost impossible. I couldn't understand it. They wrote a lot of those things in ancient times. I'm not a big believer in the First Testament. I like some of the stories and stuff in the First Testament, but some of the supernatural stuff, I really don't believe. I don't believe Moses parted the Red Sea. The laws of nature just don't change like that. I mean, God could do that. I'm not saying that he couldn't. I just don't think he would do that. But hey, I could be wrong. I don't know. But that, the supernatural stuff in the First Testament, some of it in the Old Testaments, it's mainly about Jesus. Some of the miracles, even they said not all of his miracles worked. So, maybe some of them did work, maybe some of them didn't work. But the one about him walking on water, that one, I don't really believe. I believe Jesus was the embodiment of God's love and a great moral teacher. Because he talked to other people who had different religions. And, because he wasn't the only Jewish person there. There were other, I can't remember all the different, religious people who had different types of beliefs back then, but there were many. And he would talk to all of them. Even though some were enemies with each other, he would talk to all of them, open your heart to everybody, respect their beliefs. You want to have a discussion about stuff, that's fine. That's fine. But, open your heart to this person, and then in the end, when God reveals the truth and everything, and you see the holy glory and stuff like that, and all the goodness, then you can understand maybe a lot more of what's really going on. I think science and religion are the same apple, but just taken out of bites of a different side. Science tells us how things happen, and religion tells us who made them happen. So it could be the same apple, just taken out of both sides. Because, say God's from, out of time, out of space. What if God created a Big Bang? You could say that. A Big Bang, and the first particle to come out of the Big Bang is hydrogen, which we're all made of. We got hydrogen, like good 20% in our bodies. Everything's made of hydrogen. And so, things could have, created not just here, but elsewhere. God is much bigger than we could ever imagine. So that's why a lot of the ancient texts and stuff were, some of them got them wrong. Like I said, they considered women property then. Women are not property. They're fellow human beings. Absolutely. Respect, Jesus said was a big one. Respect other people's beliefs too. Where you gotta respect, respect the laws of the land. And give unto Caesar what is Caesar, and then give unto, God what is God. So. I mean, I can understand that. But back then they believed a lot of different things. But the message I get from, from the way I feel about Jesus, he was the embodiment of God's love, a great moral teacher. I mean, if someone deserved to sit on the right hand side of God, then yeah, definitely. But do I believe God's this old man sitting in a chair with a white beard? No. It's so much bigger that I could never comprehend it. But someday, when God reveals the whole truth, which will happen, someday it will happen, the whole truth will be revealed. You will have, unlimited, you have unlimited time. You have, in this lifetime and next lifetime, to, if you want to say, to be forgiven. God will always forgive you. It's you have to forgive yourself. Can you forgive yourself and walk through that door? And it's a different. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I try to forgive the things I've done, and I try to be a little bit better, nicer person. But that's now. Sometimes I do something that's not so great, and I know that Jesus died for our sins and our past and our future sins. The only thing that you talked about was, blasphemy of the Holy Spirit. And even then, it's not that God is not forgiving you for that sin. It's that the fact that you're refusing to believe that God is only good and you believe he's evil and you want to go away from that. And even then, you don't go to hell. You just, become destroyed. And some people may want that, just to be destroyed. Because to live for, ever and ever, man, that's a long time. I don't know if I'd want to be forever and ever and ever and ever. I don't know. That's a long time to be. It's an awful long time to be. There comes a point where I would just want to, to be to rest, not to exist anymore. That peace that comes with it, not to exist. Someday, I may want that. Right now, I personally like, to be reincarnated. I would like that. I want to come to this earth. I want to see how this world ends. And I want to be here till the very bitter end. And I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. It's not going to happen in my lifetime. There's so much more that needs to go on. And everything takes like a slow progression to get there. I don't think Donald Trump is Satan or the Antichrist. He may be somewhat called the beast, but, I don't know. Whoever comes next will probably be worse. Or it may get better, and then it may get worse again. I don't know. I don't know how the world is going to turn out. I don't say I do. Just like I don't know what's in the mind of God. The only thing I really know is try to open your heart more. Open your heart more and be a nicer person, not just to yourself, but to other people too. That's not saying give all your money away, because Jesus said give all your money away, and he sent out his gospels to go out and preach. So, but no, you don't have to do that. I'm not saying that at all. All I'm saying is, just open your heart a little more and try to be a little kinder and nicer sometimes. That's all. And that in the end, everything will be okay. When you die, everything will be okay. That's the one good thing that I get out of the church. Everything will be okay. I don't like it when they preach about hell and stuff like that, because I'm not a big believer in that. I don't believe people go to hell. That doesn't make any sense to me. Eternal punishment, maybe eternal, not existing, but not torment. I don't think God would torment people. He would just relieve them of the torment that they, have. Oh. So, that's what I kind of believe. But hey, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm human. I'm human. But it's been one wild year. I felt like I've gone into a complete circle. Started where I should have started years ago. But if I hadn't, if I would have moved out there, would I have continued to go to church? That's a good question. Because I really do like this church out here. They're not all the same. Now, there is one out there, that does support, LGB and QP rights. They, treat people. That's what they say on their website and stuff. I have to look into it more, because I think we need to be more tolerant and more loving and more open to people. Even, if you're not into that, that's not your thing. Well, okay, it's not your thing. It's not really your business, really. It's not. If they want to, get married and buy a house together, they're not hurting me. No one's hurting me like that. So, but that's a whole another story. I'm not going to go into all that stuff. But this is Sunday. I can't remember what day it is. 13th, 14th, something like that, of November or December. Christmas time is coming up. I am working at least, and hopefully find a new apartment here soon. Other than that, thank you all for watching. And my name is Tommy, and this is The Big Sleep. If you like it, hit subscribe. Stick the thumbs up. I do also make some shorts, so check them out. I'll put them up here somewhere, around here somewhere, a couple of shorts or some videos. All right, everybody, you have a great night. Bye.